The Atlanta Hawks are now 1 week away from making, probably exactly at the hour at the time of this show, from making the first overall pick in the draft, which Landry Fields has come out and said it seems like, yes, they've had offers, yes, they've had calls, but he said right now we're taking number one in the draft. There's been a ton of rumors, and a lot of them center around Donovan Clingan, the UConn big man, and how much the Hawks like him. The workouts went great. Quinn Snyder especially likes him. I mean, there is a multitude, and it could all be smoke. I don't necessarily know the reasoning behind the smoke. Like, why would you smoke screen at number one? Like, what are you trying to do? Especially with a prospect that most people think is going to go 5, 6, 7, 8 in the draft. Are you buying the Donovan Clingan hike, at least as it relates to the Atlanta Hawks taking him number one overall?
I mean, at this juncture, I think you just kind of have to believe it. Obviously, a lot can change, especially a week in NBA draft world is an eternity. A lot can change. A lot can change in 24 hours, and we have a week until the Hawks are on the clock with the number one overall pick. And at this juncture, I mean, you'd be a fool not to at least believe these guys who are plugged in with ESPN suggesting that everybody in the building in Atlanta likes Donovan Clingan. Now, with that being said, I'm going to butcher his name, Zachariah Reassurcher. It's French, so I definitely butchered that. He's the betting favorite.
Just call him Zachariah.
Zachariah. We are buddies. We are buddies. Me and Zachariah. He's the betting favorite to go number one. He has overtaken Alex Sarr, who for most of the offseason has been the consensus. In a class where there's not a consensus number one, Alex Sarr kind of had that consensus number one feel. He has been overtaken by Zachariah in terms of the betting outlets, and ESPN's latest mock draft suggests that Zachariah is the favorite to still go number one. So when you compare that to the Donovan Clingan hype, which has been abundant, there has been no prospect connected more to the Atlanta Hawks in this process than Donovan Clingan. And I mean, that's just not for nothing. So when you weigh those two possibilities, I would have to venture off to say it's got to be one of those two guys that is going to be an Atlanta Hawk by the time this time next week.
Well, it certainly seems that way. I mean, we definitely know how betting odds, especially on next team things, are basically useless. It's all just built up hype in the media, and then people start betting them. They're like, oh, dude. And one of the biggest storylines right now is the fact that Alex Sarr, who was the betting favorite, everyone expects him to go number one overall. I know a lot of Hawks fans watching this are sitting here probably saying Hawks need to take Alex Sarr. Hawks need to take Alex Sarr. Everybody most people that I know that are fans, that's what they want. Now, that's not always a good thing. You shouldn't listen to guys like me or you. We don't really know what we're talking about when it comes to NBA draft prospects. But the Hawks haven't been able to get him in the building for a workout. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a travel issue. I mean, does he not want to play for the Atlanta Hawks? Does he not like the fit? I mean, on paper, you think 7-1 center, easy buckets from Trae Young all day, every day. I mean, maybe he thinks he wants to have the ball in his hand more like a Wemby. We know he's kind of like the poor man's Wemby. That's what has been his draft comparison. Maybe he's thinking, I want to bring the ball up more. I'm not going to be able to do that with Trae. I don't know maybe he didn't like Atlanta. Overtime elite prospect. Spent time at the overtime elite facility here in Atlanta. Maybe he doesn't like the city. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
I don't know what makes him love the Washington Wizards more in that sense. I mean, in every facet that you just named, the Wizards are worse. Other than that, he could be the star for the Wizards. The guy, maybe that's what he wants. But if you want to talk about trying to compete as soon as possible, Atlanta, in terms of better than Washington. If you want to talk about a nightlife, I mean, Atlanta is the nightlife, and that might not be important to him. He isn't 21. I don't know. But I think, like, when you're talking about the Atlanta Hawks, no, it's not the greatest franchise of all time. I do not like the ownership group. I think that they really royally screwed up these last few years. But with that being said, they're heads and shoulders better than the Washington Wizards. I mean, don't compare us to them, please, Lord. So I don't know if it's a logistical issue or maybe he doesn't want to play for the Atlanta Hawks. I don't know why the Hawks can't get him in a building, any building, go to overtime and work him out.
He's not in overtime anymore, but it doesn't.
But with that being said, you don't want me, I don't want you. I'll never be that guy. You know, you go after a girl and she doesn't want you. You look desperate. I don't care. I don't want that girl. And I feel like the Hawks should feel the same way. I don't know what is true and what is not in relation to not being able to get Sarr in a building. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe the Hawks.
We're a week out from the draft.
Maybe the Hawks just aren't that interested in drafting Alex Sarr.
I mean, that's even crazier too. I mean, you're the Atlanta Hawks again. You're not the Washington Wizards, but also you're not the Lakers, or you're not the Warriors. You can't leave a single stone unturned, let alone the biggest stone in this draft at the beginning of the process in Alex Sarr. I mean, on both ends, it's weird and wild.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we'll see. And maybe it is just a logistical issue, be in the building later. I mean, like you said, there's still a week left in the draft. But let's talk about this recent rumor. I know Landry Fields said, hey, right now we're picking number 1. Maybe they made some offers out there and they got turned down. But, things tend to come to fruition. If you hold someone's feet to the fire and they really want something, they may come down and meet your demands at the end of this process. And the Hawks may have a strict demand. And one that's very interesting to me is the conversations they've had with the Spurs, who own the 4th and 8th picks in this draft. But they're talking about moving down to 4 with the Spurs. But they want that 2025 first-round pick in the draft. And to me, if we're talking about ideal scenarios, right, that is the ideal scenario, because then that gives you options. You can completely tear everything down and rebuild. You can trade DeJounte, trade Trey, build around the number 4 overall pick, Jalen Johnson, have your pick next year, which is a loaded draft pick, essentially tank, which I know a lot of Hawks fans don't want to do. But the reality is sometimes you got to take steps back. And frankly, like watching a couple of young guys that are top 5 pick, or maybe not Jalen Johnson's in a top 5 pick, but he's a budding star, right? And then a top 5 pick, and then getting, a couple of good picks next year. That's the dream scenario, in my opinion. I know Hawks don't want rebuilding, but I think if you can rebuild and get that pick back, it's probably the best case scenario for the Hawks.
Yeah, I mean, even if you don't rebuild, because if you like a guy like Klingon and you clearly see that the value isn't there at the top pick, now you don't want to risk not landing your guy, but if you can still get your guy, and it is somebody like Klingon who isn't going to go 1, 2, or 3, and you can recoup that draft pick from the Spurs in the process, even if you're not rebuilding, that's a raging success. That would be a roaring success for a very inexperienced Hawks front office. I mean, even like you said, it is the first step if you were to tear it all down. But even if you weren't, just getting back your own first-round pick, which isn't protected at all, is a great move. And I would praise Landry Fields if he somehow pulled that off.
Yeah, I mean, and you could really split that narrow path that we're always talking about. Whether the Hawks want to compete, maybe they go out there, they get Klingon, they get the guy that they wanted all along, they get their pick, they can go run it with Klingon and trade DeJounte Murray, or however they want to do it. Run it, see what they got, and if they end up, near the trade deadline where they're right in that play-in thing, hey, trade everybody away, hit the tank button, and try to get a top 5 pick, and you have that option. So you could actually do both next season. Give it a run, give it the best shot that you got with Klingon and Trae Young and whoever, Jalen Johnson, and then maybe hit the tank button in the middle of the season, really make Trae Young available, because Trae Young's value this season is probably going to be the same whether it's at the trade deadline or over the winter. Maybe it's going to be even more valuable at the trade deadline because someone realizes maybe a point guard goes down, who knows, but it could be even more valuable at the trade deadline for a team that's in desperate need of a point guard and they're ahead of the curve where they thought they were going to be before the season.
I would argue that Trae Young's trade value hasn't been lower than it is right now because he just came off a season where he dealt with an injury, missed some time. The pair of him and DeJounte Murray clearly did not work. They're both killers on their own. They're both great players on their own, but together it's clearly not working. Neither was the best version of themselves while the other was on the court. I would argue, outside of the DeJounte Murray contract, which is the best thing going for DeJounte Murray, and he just had a career year shooting, that both of their value has never been lower. I mean, especially if you go look back at the trade that the Hawks gave up all that stuff for DeJounte Murray. I would say, running it back, I don't hate it as much as I hate rebuilding. I really do.
And I don't even back with Trae Young and DeJounte.
Yeah.
Shut up, dude. That's the
because you're saying if you can get that first round pick back and you go to 4 and you take whoever it is, if it's
you're still got to trade Trae Young or DeJounte Murray.
You don't think that they can improve their trade value? So that's the optimist in me. And regardless,
if they improve their trade value, they're going to be better and they're going to want to keep them. If they're worse, they're going to only decrease their trade value.
Well, see, I don't know if the NBA clubs don't necessarily, they can separate team success versus individual success. Trae Young did not look good individually, and the team was not having a ton of success. What if they both have a lot of success and the team is still floating just above 500? I mean, it's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, but I think the main point that I'm trying to make, and I guess illustrate that you have options if you do and somehow get that 2025 first-round pick back. Like you said, you could tear it down. You extend the runway at the very least with Trae Young or DeJounte Murray. I think it's a no-brainer if you can somehow pull that off. And if Donovan Clingan is your guy. Now, you shouldn't risk missing out on your guy just for that first-round pick. I think that is the craziest thing you could do. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
That's dumb. That's suicide by a franchise.
I got lost when you said running it back with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray because I'm sorry, I don't care what happens in this draft.
I just love them both.
There is 0% chance the Hawks should do that. Now, I'm not saying they won't do it, but that you cannot. This is not working. It is not. And their trade value isn't that bad. Like you can get something for both of them. You can build around.
But it has never been lower.
I can agree with that, but I don't think it gets higher. If it gets higher, it means you had success. If it gets higher, it means you had success, so you're probably not going to want to break it up.
So then we have success.
But it's not. We're not. It's not going to. That's the thing. Like we're not going to have success. We've seen this. Like the writing's on the wall with this experiment. It was a failure. Let's try to.
I've got Stockholm syndrome.
It's a sunk cost. I mean, it's the definition of a sunk cost.
I love them both. I don't want to choose.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I can agree with that. Like, I'm not excited. I think both of them can have success wherever they go, and that's why I think the trade value thing, it hasn't been lower, but I still don't think it's that low as a lot of maybe NBA insiders want you to think that hate the Hawks and are like, yeah, here's a pennies for your best player.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, I just don't believe that it is that low.